everyone, and welcome to the second episode in our digital mini-series. My name's Billy, and today I'll be speaking to Nik Peachey, founder of PeacheyPublications, which produces and provides digital materials and apps for both teachers and students.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Good, yeah.
So thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show today. It's so nice to have you here. Maybe we can start by you telling us a little bit about yourself.
In terms of my kind of background for ELT, for teaching generally, I started teaching originally. I taught the guitar, and I studied music, and I taught the guitar at a prison while I was studying music. I was a mature student. I needed some money to get by, and my next door neighbour told me about this gig at the prison where I could go once a week and teach the guitar.
Wow.
And so that's how I got interested in teaching. And from there, when I finished my degree in music, which is one of the least useful degrees you can have, I think, probably, I decided to sort of travel a bit and went to Cairo to do a CELTA. And I really got hooked on sort of language teaching from that and really enjoyed it. And I thought, well, the world won't miss one less jazz guitarist. So I got into teaching instead. And from there, I taught in various countries around the world. Somehow ended up in Barcelona at International House there and started doing CELTA training and started a master's in educational technology back in the late 1990s and sort of got really into that. And I worked for the British Council for a while, developing their teaching websites and developing products for teachers for the British Council, and then decided to go freelance. And since then, I've worked off and on freelance since about 2007, doing various projects, writing work, starting my own publishing business, teacher training in various countries, online training, basically whatever I can do to sort of bring the money in and keep a roof over my head.
So how long were you teaching for before you decided to set up your own sort of publishing company?
I guess teaching about 10 to 15 years. And then there was a kind of an intermittent phase where I was sort of doing a lot of teacher training, but not very much teaching.
Yeah.
And then I've had a kind of couple of periods where money got very tight and I had to get a job kind of thing. And I worked as head of learning for a 100% online school for a couple of years from about 2014 to 2016 and I did a year working for Eton College, helping set up Eton X, which was their online school for developing soft skills with students. Interesting sort of thing as well.
Do you think working for the online school sort of pushed you into the digital focus that you have now?
Yeah, very much so, actually. When I was working for the online school, I mean, one of the things that we were doing was this was back in 2014, and we were kind of, we were looking around for content for our teachers to teach, and all there was paper-based course books, which, you don't really work very well. You can't just hold them up. If you scan them, you're breaking copyright law and that kind of thing. And we ended up having to develop a lot of our own stuff. And at the end of that period in 2016, after I finished with the school, I could see that, I felt this was where things were going. And so that's what I based my materials development on. I thought I'll make materials which are ideal for this kind of environment and which also work in a kind of connected classroom on an interactive whiteboard. So that's sort of, I sort of had discovered a few HTML5 type tools that enabled me to develop the materials so they were interactive, they'd run on mobile, you could screen share them and that kind of thing. So that's where the idea came from.
That's really good. And what sort of things have you done since you started developing the early materials with your PeacheyPublications?
Well, the early materials were all were originally teacher development books. And I originally developed for the iPad. So I used iBooks Author and made them interactive and put videos in them. But I found that was, it was a lot of work. Like the first book was, I crowdsourced the funding for it. I'd never written a book before or developed it. And I crowdsourced about £5,000 from a group of about 138 teachers, to do this first book, which was digital video.
Wow.
And I wanted to have videos in it and video tutorials and things like that. So I did it on iBooks Author, published it for the iPad. And that one won the British Council's Innovations Award in 2016.
That's great.
But, it didn't really make much money apart from that. I think the week after I won the award, it sold 10 copies, which was kind of hugely disappointing. I was thinking, it's like the Oscars of the ELT world.
Definitely.
Money's going to come flooding in. It just didn't. So, then I started thinking about developing more materials. And that's when I thought about finding HTML5 and developing in HTML5 so it wasn't dependent on the iPad. Because, nowadays the market for books for the iPad is minimal. It just hardly anybody buys books for the iPad anymore. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So that kind of market has really crashed. And, so now I develop the teacher's guides in PDF, and that's kind of they can be printed, but I don't design them to be printed because they're full color and everything like that. Yeah. And then I develop the classroom materials in HTML5 so that they're sort of dynamic presentations. And, I've started to wrap that up into an app. So now teachers can sort of subscribe to an app and they get all of the materials and they can sort of access it on their phone or on their desktop, and they can launch the lessons directly from their desktop and start screen sharing them. It makes the kind of, teaching and storing the materials process very easy.
Definitely, yeah. And do you update that regularly, or do teachers get a notification when there's new content on there?
It's updated every week. There's something new for teachers every week, which is part of the subscription deal. So, there's about 100 lessons on there, about 20 books and some video materials. And I've also put a little part of it, which is called a Toolbox in there, which is, at the moment, is about 70 or 80 links to digital tools and applications that teachers can use to enhance their teaching. And each has a little video clip with it so they can watch the video and find out about the tool, and it links through to the tool as well.
That's really interesting. And how have you seen the pandemic change the number of subscriptions that you have for things like that? Has it affected you?
It's certainly boosted the number of subscriptions, with sort of teachers going towards doing much more kind of online teaching. Then, it's certainly boosted subscriptions and boosted sales of my materials, which, for me is good. I hate to profit from a pandemic, but, it seems to have, it seems to have found a niche, and it's something that teachers obviously do need. And also, I'm quite experienced at developing the materials, but it still takes me a couple of days to develop the lesson plan, the digital materials, all the interaction. So, for teachers having to come and do that themselves, that's a lot of time to put in to plan your lesson. Definitely. So if you can buy something, for a couple of dollars, which, saves you all that time, then I think, that just makes sense.
Definitely. And what are some of the ways that you market your materials, and who is your target market?
In terms of the target market, I think nowadays it's pretty much any teacher or school who wants to launch, and teach online. Most of the marketing is viral and organic. I don't pay for search engine marketing or anything like that, or Facebook ads. I've got quite a big kind of organic following that I've built up through sharing materials that are free. Yeah. So I've got something between about 120,000 to 150,000 followers through various networks. So, I just sort of add in a couple of, every time I make something new, I send it through my network, and that's how it's generated customers. And so far I've had about 11,000 customers who've bought, I think it's around 30,000 copies of materials. So,
that's excellent. So, that's really,
I guess that's a rate of about 3 per customer, which is pretty good. That's really good. A lot of the time I give stuff away as well, but that's not all sales, but it shows that there's demand there, and people come back for more materials, which is great. Definitely.
And after the pandemic, do you think that there will still be as much of a digital focus as obviously there has had to have been now? Or do you think things will change?
Things will change, but, things are always changing. And I think, initially, as lockdowns end, or as the virus is defeated, if eventually it is, there will be this sort of huge sigh for a lot of teachers of people moving back to the classroom and going, at last. But I think once they've been back there a little while, the things that they've learned from being pushed outside their comfort zone will start creeping back. And I think, people who go back to the classroom, their classroom teaching will be enhanced through having gone through this process, which I think is a good thing. And of course, there are all those teachers, and there are quite a lot that I've been talking to, who've actually found they really enjoy online teaching, and they're really good at it, and they really like not having to, put on trousers and go to school. Okay, you still have to put on a jacket, but they're not having to sort of, commute every day, find somewhere to park, or like myself, I felt that I had to live close to London. To ensure that I was employed, and now I don't. So I've traded my okay house in an area close to London that was very expensive for a very, very nice house that's close to the beach instead. So you can, there are those of us who are going to be able to make those kind of lifestyle choices if this is, the way you want to do it, which is great, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I do think people have made a lot of positive realisations out of this bad situation as well, for sure. So apart from online classes, what do you think the benefits are for teachers and students when they go back to the real world classroom? What are the benefits of trying to incorporate sort of digital tools and resources into those classes?
I think what we've seen from the pandemic as well is that, the future workplace will also be changed by what's happened. Lots of the big companies like Facebook and Google are allowing their employees to work from home now, and that will continue. And I think it isn't just those big companies, it's almost every company is realizing, hey, we don't have to have this big office full of people sitting in rows, when they could be sitting at home and working just as well. So, I think we're going to realise that, to be able to communicate with this kind of genre using video conferencing is going to become a common part of the workplace and a common workplace skill. And I think, continuing to have lessons using this or continuing to use digital tools in the classroom is going to become essential to provide students with the digital skills that they need for the workplace. So it's kind of going to be part of their life skills training, I think.
And how can someone find your teacher app and your teacher resources if they want to subscribe?
Just go to PeacheyPublications.com, and they're all there. If you Google Peachey Publications or Nik Peachey, Peachey Publications, I'm sure that will come up.
Excellent. Great. I'd had a look at your blog because you update it quite often, and I saw that you had an article about QR codes, and I was intrigued by this because I've never sort of used QR codes in my teaching past, but what ways can they be helpful, and how can teachers generate these if they want to use them in their classes?
There's a lot of ways they can be helpful. In fact, they're really helpful for digitising materials, especially in the classroom, because, the QR code, you can put it on a piece of paper or on your presentation, and all the student has to do is sort of wave their phone at it, and then you've got any kinds of digital materials that you've linked it to straight onto their phone. And this is something that I combine into my own materials as well. So, in the remote classroom, like we are now in Zoom, when you want to put your students into breakout rooms to do, for example, a role play, as soon as they move into the breakout rooms, they've lost your presentation screen, haven't they? So they can't see anything. So what I've done is I've added digital roll cards, and students scan their QR code. So when they go into the breakout room, they've got their roll card here on their phone, and they can do their role play. Which seems to work quite well. So the QR codes, you can do lots of things like that. What they do is they just, they convert a text or a URL into binary. And so what that code is actually all those little dots, black and white dots, is a binary code that your camera can read. And if it reads it as a URL, it opens that URL on your device. So you can link videos to them, you can have digital worksheets that are linked to them, anything digital that you want to get onto your student's device, you can put there. they're very simple to create. I use a site called the QR Code Generator, theqrcodegenerator.com, and you just copy paste a URL in there and it instantly creates the code, and you download it as an image, and then you just sort of copy and paste it onto whatever you want to use it with, whether it's a worksheet, paper worksheet, or a digital worksheet, or something you show on your screen.
That's really useful. Yeah, like you said, especially when they go to the breakout rooms, because from my experience, I've just had sort of people taking pictures of the screen or quickly noting it down, and it's not the same. It's not as effective as using a QR code.
Yeah, because with the QR code, you can actually give them sort of interactive materials to do there on their own as well. So like I use a tool called H5P to develop interactive materials.
Okay.
And so I can sort of put a QR code on my presentation for them so students can scan that and they can actually do the listening activities independently on their phones if they want to, or they can do gap fill activities or drag and drop activities independently. That's and then we can, in the classroom, we can say, let's go through it together, and you just go through the answers in the classroom with the presentation screen.
That's really good. And is H5P something that you create your materials on, or is it specifically for your app?
It's the H5P, you can create any HTML5 interactive materials with it. It's an open source platform originally developed by the Norwegian Army for developing language skills, but it's now kind of got a real community behind it because it's open source, and they're developing lots of nice kind of interactive activities. You can create dictation activities, voice recognition activities, as well as your kind of gap fill listening activities, drag and drop, and all that kind of thing. So I build the interaction in H5P and then sort of build those into the presentations, which are kind of much more design-based and dynamic.
So would you say that that's quite straightforward for teachers to use if they wanted to create their own materials?
Yeah, H5P is quite easy to use. It's not difficult to learn. It's not like you have to learn any coding or anything like that. They have instructions on each of the activity types. If you want to use it for free, you'll need to have a WordPress site or a Moodle site, and then it's a free plugin for either of those platforms. If you don't have one of those platforms, then you have to pay a subscription, which is a lot for a teacher, but probably not too much for a school. If you wanted to do it as a school thing, a license is something like sort of $40 a month. So too much, I think, for the average teacher to pay on their own. But as a school institution, if you're going to use it across the school, but like I say, if you've got a WordPress site, then it's a free plugin for WordPress because I think they co-developed it. So
that's really useful to know. Yeah, I mean, creating your own teacher materials has changed a lot since I was in the classroom a couple of years ago. I mean, even in the last 2 years, because there has been a shift to online teaching, for me, I've got maybe 5, 6, 7 drawers full of paper, just in levels, but things that I intended on using again, but had I been teaching online, they would have been useless. So yeah, using something like H5P would be really, really good for teachers to create their own materials. Also on your blog, you had an article about the importance of socialisation in the remote classroom, which I think is quite difficult to achieve, really. So what do you think is some advice for encouraging students to socialise in an online class and just sort of getting a feel of a real-life classroom, but virtually?
Yeah, I think one of the essential things is that, teachers make time for them to do it and space for them to do it. Because, when you think about your experience of going to university or your experience of going to a language lesson in a physical school, a lot of the reason why you go there is because, you meet people who you like and, you sit and have coffee with them, or maybe you go for a beer with them afterwards or whatever, or you just sit and have a chat. And with the kind of remote learning experience like that is gone unless we ensure that we put it back. So, just giving students some time together in breakout rooms when you're not there, watching them and monitoring them, I think is one of my first suggestions. Give them some time to have a chat. Okay, if they're there early, put them in breakout rooms to have a chat about whatever they want. Okay, and one of the other things I think that's important and what the article links to is some activities that I'm writing about sort of team building for the remote classroom. because I think it's really important that you kind of foster this atmosphere of that students are working collaboratively and cooperatively, and that they're sort of working as a team, because I think it is a very kind of, in order to learn in this kind of classroom, it is a very codependent experience. And if you've got somebody who's messing around, or who's misbehaving, or who isn't engaging and who isn't cooperating with their partners in breakout rooms, then it becomes really difficult for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it's important that right from the beginning of your course, you kind of develop your students as a team. They get to know each other well, so have lots of getting to know each other type activities. And, and one of the things that has really been missed in this sort of quick move to the online classroom is that schools haven't really set up some kind of code of practice or behaviour. So students kind of don't know what's expected of them.
Yeah.
They know if they turn up in a physical classroom that they have clothes on, that they're dressed properly. They know not to bring a friend along with them, or who's going to play a computer game. They know, that they have to work in pairs when they're or groups when they're put into groups.
Yeah.
But for some reason, teachers are telling me that, a lot of these things just don't carry over. And partly that's because the school kind of hasn't established that pattern of behaviour with them. They don't know, how they should behave in a classroom. They don't know that actually inviting a friend along to Zoom bomb the class isn't funny. They don't know, what the repercussions for that will be, or that there'll be any comeback on them. Yeah. And in a lot of cases there isn't, because in terms of student behaviour, the teachers don't seem to be getting that much support. The teachers just had to deal with everything. And, if you have this code of practice and you agree a kind of contract of behaviour with your students, then, you can limit a lot of that and cut that down before it even starts. And that's what the book is about, and the socialisation thing is about. It's about, okay, we'll have fun, we'll socialise, we'll get to know each other, but we will also work together and, we'll work as a team, and this is how we'll help each other.
Definitely. Do you think it's worth doing that with the students themselves? So sort of eliciting from them what they would expect in a virtual classroom?
Yeah. One of the activities from the book is based around sort of giving them different areas. You can do this in a virtual classroom. Do you think that's a good idea? Discuss together. And then they're sort of shown what the outcome of that is for the teacher or the class. And at the end of going through these different behaviours, they write up together. They write up their own code of conduct. So and they sign that. So that's sort of the idea of sort of getting them to sort of discuss the behaviour, think about, what impact it has on other people, and then decide what they think is acceptable, and they all agree to that. And so in that way, they're more likely to sort of peer pressure will help them to kind of keep everybody else in line, I think.
Of course, yeah. I recently delivered a teacher training session, and something that kept coming up was the use of breakout rooms. Some people struggled with putting students into breakout rooms and then referring to their L1. Do you think that's an issue with socialisation as well, or do you encourage them to speak in whichever language they are as long as they are socialising?
I think purely from the socialisation aspect, I think it's up to them to sort of do it in whatever language they like. You've given them 5 or 10 minutes, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes after the lesson, to have a chat. Yeah. Because it's quite likely that they'll chat about the lesson if it's after the lesson as well. And I think that kind of debooting after a lesson is quite good. It's like going to a film with someone afterwards. You have a chat about it, and it helps you to process things, doesn't it? So that kind of socialisation, regardless of the language, is quite a good thing. I think obviously the L1 in the breakout rooms, if you've given them a task to do and it's a language learning task, is more of a problem. But, if you're sort of making your aims clear and they're clear about what the aim of the task is, that can help. It's also worth that when you put students in breakout rooms, assigning one of them as the monitor. So because it's difficult to get round all the breakout rooms yourself and find out what's happening, if you put one person in each breakout room as monitor for the activity, they can make notes and they can feed back to the class and to you about, okay, this is what happened in the room and this is how students did. So they're still being observed, even if it's by a peer.
Yeah.
It's also worth giving those monitors sort of clear tasks. This is what you should be monitoring for. Check that everybody is engaged, everybody participates, see if they're, do they make any mistakes? Do they get stuck? And so, you involve students as being your kind of monitors for you and your eyes and ears.
That's a really good idea.
That can sort of help a little bit.
Yeah, especially if you, like you said, you don't have time to go round to each breakout room, especially if you are teaching larger classes as well. Do you think then maybe it's a case of just, obviously now people may be a bit more adjusted to teaching online, but maybe just relaxing into it a bit? Because I think teaching online, we have to have everything prepared and it's a bit more sort of time sensitive in the fact that we use breakout rooms and then we've got so much to get through and it's completely different. So do you think it's just sort of taking a more laid back approach in a way to it?
Yeah, I think so. I think teachers have, obviously initially when, everybody was pushed into doing this with a couple of weeks' notice, probably the biggest obstacle they felt was the technology. But actually teachers tend to get their heads around the technology quite quickly. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing, like you're saying, is that, things take longer. So you kind of have to plan to do less, getting students in and out of breakout rooms takes time. So, it's just a matter of, being a bit more laid back and planning to do a bit less and, and maybe being a bit more, you do still have to be rigid with the time, but sort of, being a bit less driven, let's sort of, give things time to happen.
Yeah, definitely. So where do you think after the pandemic and in years to come, where do you think English language teaching is heading in the future?
Well, I think a lot more of it is going to continue to happen in this kind of environment. Not all of those students who were going to face-to-face classes will go back to face-to-face classes, even if they can. Sadly, a lot of the schools that were delivering them have closed down as well.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a very interesting period in terms of the language learning industry, because, it has come onto the radar of lots of big tech companies that, hey, there's this huge market there for people who want to learn English, and that's ripe for disruption. We can see it's being disrupted, anyway. And so there is the danger that, or maybe it's a good thing or maybe it's a bad thing, that some huge tech company swoops in and just decides, okay, this is a multi-billion-dollar global market. I'm going to take this, in the same way that kind of Uber has with taxis or, Airbnb has with letting out rooms. It would be possible for a tech company to march in and sort of, capture the market. And so students end up with, an app on their phone that they instantly book a lesson with the teacher on, and teachers end up sitting around waiting for their phone call to happen to tell them that they've got a student coming.
Oh no, I wouldn't like
that kind of thing. That's why I say the danger is, there are good ways for this to happen and there are bad ways. The other side of that is, there's teachers cooperatives springing up, which is great. So teachers setting up their own online schools, teacher marketplaces where you can set yourself up and work independently. And if you have, if you're a bit web savvy and you're good at social media, there is the chance to kind of start recruiting your own students and set up your own school yourself and choose the way you want to live your life instead of having some kind of Uber type company doing it. Definitely. So, there's opportunities there as well as the kind of dangers.
So you think people will start working more individually now that maybe they've had the time to assess their situation and things like that? Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I've seen over this last year that's been really great is the amount of teachers who are, becoming social media savvy, starting to market themselves through Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Clubhouse, wherever, It seems that, teachers... actually, it's funny because I had an interview about some work with the head of a big language school, just about 2 months after the pandemic started. And he said, it's like we're being dragged 10 years into the future. And I thought, no, it's not. It's like you're being dragged 10 years into the present.
Yeah.
You know, this is what's happening
It's
now.
true.
You know, and you know, it seems to drag teachers' competencies and their digital skills up to the present as well. And so they're really sort of getting engaged with social media and with digital tools, and finding that, you know, they can market themselves through them, build their own businesses, and you know, help students learn, and they're doing it very, very well. You know, I see some great things on Instagram that teachers are doing from all over the world, and that's marvelous. That's sort of one of the real marvelous kind of side effects of this awful thing that's happened around the world.
Definitely. So we've had a few listener questions, something that you touched on earlier related to Peachey Publications. So the first question is that I've written a teacher training course which I'd love to share online as a paid course, but there are so many others out there that I feel like it's not worth it. Is it worth putting it online for free just to build my reputation?
I think if you've written a course, you've put in a lot of work, and I think you should sort of get something back from that. The thing to do is sort of put part of it online available for free, and, you know, then if people like that, you can build your reputation from that. And if they want the rest of the course, they can sort of pay for it. It doesn't have to be expensive, but sort of try and get something back for your hard work, you know, especially as, you know, the money from that could help you build another one. And, you know, you could sort of launch a career from that.
Definitely.
You know, reputation is great, but you can't eat it, you know.
That's true.
The sad fact is, I know that only too well.
You said that you release some of your materials for free. So is that the model that you follow as well?
Yeah. One of the biggest obstacles to sort of selling stuff online is really trust. So, you know, trust in quality, trust in the system, the payment system isn't going to rip off someone's credit card or something like that. So by giving stuff away, you can help build some trust, build reputation, and people get a free sample. And, you know, if they think it's good, then they'll be prepared to come back for more and pay for it.
Definitely.
You know.
Another question was, what are some ways to get students and subscribers to my website to download my materials, apart from using YouTube and doing free videos, or I guess giving away free materials as well?
You know, there are other ways that you can do it. You know, if you're doing, it's more difficult, I think, to capture the student market than doing the teacher market. Like for example, you know, it's easy to sort of do webinars for teachers and things like that. Yeah. But building up your kind of presence on Facebook helps, Twitter helps. You know, having the right hashtags, sharing materials to build trust. All of those things help. You can also pay for marketing through things like Twitter and Facebook, you know, and find groups on Facebook where learners are already kind of interacting and trying to learn themselves. There's loads of groups for learners on Facebook where people share little video clips to help them learn. Yeah. You could even do something like set up a English conversation group on Facebook and sort of invite learners to come in free, just give a little bit of content every week so they can learn from that and use that as your vehicle for marketing your kind of paid courses. So, you know, or Clubhouse, for example, you know, do a couple of free lessons on Clubhouse and invite people along. You know, lots of different ways to do it. I found most, for me at least, most of the effective ways are the free ways and the ways where you grow organically. Yeah. I've experimented a bit with, you know, Facebook marketing, paid ads and paid ads in Pinterest and a few paid ads in other places, and they never really bring much return, at least not for me. And I think, you know, things like Google search engine marketing, if you want to start spending money on that to build a customer base, you've really got to be thinking about tens of thousands of pounds, you know, to really invest in it, because that's where all the big companies are and you're bidding against them. So you have to sort of, you know, put the amount of money in that those big companies are putting in. So for me, that's kind of hopeless. You know, I don't have that kind of money to put in, but you can build things organically and through sort of genuine interaction with people and building trust.
And which social media platform would you say has given you the most customers? Would you prefer Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook?
It's changed over time. It used to be Facebook. I used to get quite a lot of my customers coming through Facebook, and now it's moving much more towards LinkedIn for me. lots of customers coming through LinkedIn and lots more activity and interaction through LinkedIn. But that's because, I'm going to teachers and that's professional. And it'll probably be different for students, depending on the kind of students you're looking for. If you're looking for adult professionals, then maybe LinkedIn is a good place for you to go. Each of these social media channels has their kind of demographic. If you're looking to teach teenagers, then maybe you should be looking at Snapchat, Instagram, and things like that, or looking at TikTok or something like that.
Yeah, there's just
But
so many.
You're probably not going to get your mature adult businessman through TikTok. He's going to be on.
That's true. It's very time consuming, isn't it? Because there's so many. It's just posting them on all of them and seeing what comes up.
It is time consuming, and I think the thing to do is sort out your customer personas of who your target market are, where they are, and then sort of concentrate on the strongest channels where you can find them.
Definitely.
That's where you'll get the most bang for your buck. I think
absolutely.
The term is.
So you mentioned webinars briefly, but you give lots of webinars and teacher training sessions as well. So what would be your top tips for giving successful and interactive webinars or teacher training sessions?
Top tips for giving, make sure you make sure it's practical. Basically, make sure it's practical, that you share ideas that teachers can go away and use. And if you're doing that as a way of marketing what you do, make sure you kind of have some kind of call to action at the end of it. Don't do a whole webinar and get to the end of it and think, oh, people know me and like me now, and so they'll go and find my site and buy something from me or book a lesson with me, because they won't. At the end of the webinar, you have to sort of put it on the line and be prepared to sell yourself. So here's a 50% discount code for your first lesson with me or something.
Yeah.
The best way for teachers, I think, is be sure you give them something practical that they can use in their classroom. And that's, what most teachers are kind of looking for. Back that up with a bit of theory, share some experience, and, try not to be too dull.
That's the key, isn't it? Have you got any upcoming webinars or teacher training sessions that you're giving?
I'm sure I have, yeah. I've got one next week on Tuesday, which is sort of presenting ideas to. There's a company that produced this nice tool which generates word clouds from videos.
Okay.
So it can analyze the script of the video and give you a word cloud of the video.
Wow.
And you can actually sort of watch the word cloud change alongside the video, which is really great. Yeah. So I've developed a webinar for them where I show some ideas for how to use the word clouds with the video for language development.
Wow.
So that's on Tuesday. And then I've got a few others sort of booked in sort of later in the year, a couple in June and a couple in July. I also do some of my own. I use a platform called Go Brunch, which is free, and you can sort of schedule your own webinars there, and you can have as many as 400 people there if you can sort of get them in. So I do some sort of free webinars there, which are kind of promoting the ideas that I use in my book, and then give a discount code for one of my books or something like that.
I've not heard of that website before. That sounds really good. And have you got any exciting things coming up with Peachey Publications?
I've just published a lesson plan on feminism, which is a kind of my danger leap for this week. I think I found an infographic about feminism, and I did a whole series of lessons about using infographics for developing digital literacy skills a couple of years ago. And I found this infographic on feminism and some sort of facts and figures from around the world. And it was so powerful that I thought, maybe it's time to do another lesson and use this.
Yeah.
I think it's a tricky area to deal with in the classroom. Yeah. But, if you start it coming from the basis of, well, there are these statements of fact, which may or may not be true. Let's examine them, see how we feel about them, find out if they're true, find out if they're changed. And so it's helping to kind of encourage learners to explore feminism through, factual materials rather than kind of accusing them of being sexist or, having a big argument in the classroom. It's basically, it's detaching it from them a little bit, looking at the facts and seeing how they respond to them.
That's interesting.
So that's my exciting thing for this week.
I saw, I think I want to say Pete Clements posted something that he's published a book through PeacheyPublications. Have you started publishing other people's books as well?
I published a book that Pete and Richard McCulley did over a year ago now. They had I had this idea that I'd start publishing other authors, and then sort of, but what I was going to do was charge a small fee. So because otherwise I'd get 400 submissions, which I couldn't possibly cope with. So I thought if I put a small fee on it, that'll restrict the number, and I'll be able to cope with it a bit. And they restricted the number so much that I didn't get any. And then I noticed on Pete's blog, he had this comment about, PeacheyPublications has set up this thing to help authors, but they're charging this much. I've never made this much from the book that I've published, so why would I do that? Yeah. So I got in contact with him and I said, look, give the book to me. I'll turn it into sort of a digital publication, which, and we can do 50-50 on royalties. So that's what we did. And sort of I developed the book. It was just a plain black and white PDF, sort of added images, built interactive role play cards. It's a book called 30 Role Plays for TEFL. So I built the kind of role play cards, made them digital, built an app version of the book. So there's a student's workbook, which is an app. So the students have got all the role play cards on it and things like that. And sort of it's sold very well, it's sort of, and it has made them a few dollars. And so, he sort of published that. But I haven't done very much with other authors. It's kind of difficult to do because of time restrictions. And, lots of people want to write a book, but when it comes to writing the book, they discover that it's actually really hard work and it peters out very quickly. There's a great TED talk by a guy called Tim Urban, and it's about procrastination. And it is worth watching from the aspect of procrastination, but it's also really interesting that he says he'd always wanted to do a TED talk, but what he'd wanted was to have done a TED talk and be able to say, I've done a TED talk, rather than to do the talk. And then he suddenly realized that, doing it was very different from being able to say, hey, I've done a TED talk.
Absolutely.
But it's that kind of thing, it's really kind of, you need some stamina the first time and,
100%.
And you need to go about it in the right way. But once you've done the first one, my first book took me a year. And after that, I could sort of churn them out, in a month, and then went to doing lesson materials in a week, and it's that, okay, you've got your head around it, you can do it, you know how to do it, and not to think too big. Yeah. And I think that's probably the biggest problem, is that most authors think too big. They think this has got to be, it's got to be perfect, I've got to put everything into it, it's got to be this wonderful, all-encompassing, everything I've learned over the last 20 years. Yeah. And it doesn't, because that will never happen. My best advice is go for, there's a guy called Eric Ries who wrote a book called The Lean Startup. And he had this idea of what he calls the minimally viable product. Produce the minimum amount that you can do to have a viable product, to give someone some quality learning from something, publish that, learn from it and develop it. And that's how I've done most books after the first one. I published them a chapter at a time, got some learning from that, got some feedback from it, improved them and built them eventually into a book. There's a book that I wrote called Thinking Critically Through Digital Media. And that started off as one lesson plan and built into 12 lesson plans. And then it was another book called Exploiting Infographics. And then there was another book on presentations, and eventually I combined them into the one book. I started off with this plan of what I wanted to write and wrote it piece by piece and started selling the pieces as well. So
that's really interesting. Yeah,
and that works quite well that way, that kind of iterative design of things.
Definitely. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to writing ELT materials, I think you have to be in a certain headspace as well. It's not something you can pick up at any time of the day and just sit down and write. I think you have to zone out and fully focus on what you're doing, and you have to be in the right mind space to do it.
Yeah. One of the things that how I got my head around doing it was that I was working in London for a while and commuting in every day, sort of 45 to an hour commute each way, and I hated the waste of time. And I developed the ability to sort of sit on my laptop surrounded by people, and just sort of got in my bubble of thought, and I wrote a whole bunch of lesson plans and one of the books totally on the fast train into King's Cross over the course of a year, because you have to find your space and develop that ability to sort of get into your sort of mental place to do it. But yeah, you do need that frame of mind to okay, I'm going to sit down and write. But the wonderful thing about being stuck on a horrible commute was there was nothing else I could do. I could either watch people chewing their fingernails or I could sort of get my laptop out, ignore the world and just sort of focus on writing. And that's what I did, really.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to have a chat, and we'll put some of the links to some of the books that you mentioned. I think will be really useful as well.
Yeah. Okay, great, good.
A link to PeacheyPublications and the other resources that you mentioned as well.
Okay, great, good.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
So thanks so much for listening to our show today. We hope you got lots of excellent takeaways. If you do have any questions for Nik or about our discussion, feel free to get in touch at info@eltcpd.com. In our next episode, we'll be talking about the use of virtual reality in English language teaching and the blended classroom. So make sure you're following us on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn, and that you're subscribed to us on YouTube and your favourite podcast channel to be the first to hear the next episode. Once again, thanks for listening and see you next time. Bye!